Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu ala rasulillah, wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to be back at Faith. This is actually our first event on a Friday. As you all know, we don't do events on like Fridays or the weekends, mainly because everybody's busy. There's like a million things going on in London. Everybody's getting ready for the weekend, but I appreciate you all coming out, alhamdulillah. This is a collaboration with Like Media, which is headed by Rehan, in a series we decided to do called The Antagonists. And this has a story or backdrop behind it. Number one, it's because Rehan forced me to do it. Just kidding. We basically said Like Media hasn't had an event, a series. So he's like, let's talk about a new perspective on stories you've already heard before. And that perspective has to do with some of the people that were essentially key or integral to some of the stories in the Quran, so that we can learn a different perspective, inshallah ta'ala. So just as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives examples in the Quran, stories in the Quran, so that we can essentially have benefit. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ, Allah says. In the example of these people and stories that passed, it's a ibrah, it's a reflection point. It's also guidance that you can derive. So that's why the Quran is actually composed of three components. Number one, you have beliefs, the theology. What does God want us to believe about life, the hereafter, purpose? Second is ahkam, or rulings. Basically, God gives us a framework to life. It's not just He just leaves you, but rather there's a framework to things. And you have to follow a particular format, things that are acceptable, things that are not acceptable, in order to fulfill what our belief actually means. So you can't just essentially say, I'm Muslim, without having to follow some kind of structure. So that's why this second portion of the Quran is rulings, what to do, what not to do. And thirdly, or lastly, is stories. So much of the Quran is stories that we learn through the examples of others, what to do and to follow in people's examples that have already passed. So that you don't think that, okay, you're unique, or maybe God's giving you something that's very unique to you and He did not give to others. So this is why stories are so important and repeated. In fact, most of the Quran's lessons and theology and belief and etc. is through stories of others. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was taught essentially to follow the examples of the prophets before him and the people before him and the nations before him, because he also followed in the example of the stories of the prophets and their struggles and their hardships as well. So of course in those stories there are always protagonists, essentially the good guys, right? And then there's also antagonists, those who are the bad guys. And essentially Islamic historians speak about this. Why do you even care about history? Just because of the story? No. So that if you see good examples in history, it will make you want to follow them and be like them. And that's why people tell their stories, the heroes and those who saved others and those who stood and they were steadfast and so on and so forth. You're learning what? Resilience and overcoming personal struggles and etc. Even in the most difficult of times, you always have these protagonists. And then you have the antagonists, those who essentially you never want to follow in their example, and history still has their mention, so that humanity essentially does not follow in their footsteps. So we chose a number of antagonists, which is interesting to see from their perspective, right? So the first perspective was Qarun, which was the cousin of Musa, from one of his uncles on his father's side, who became one of his worst enemies. He stood out against him and he spoke out against him, and he was from Bani Israel, he's from the children of Israel, and he participated in their oppression from his own people. And he had a massive amount of wealth. He could have used that for standing for the truth and for justice. He essentially became the economic and finance wing of the worst tyrant in human history, among the worst tyrants in human history, Pharaoh. Okay? So we talked about him. We talked about the father of flame, which is the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Abu Lahab, and how he was the source of all of the rejection of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the initial stage of the Prophet publicly speaking about Islam. So you talk about toxic family, that was probably the biggest toxic family you could have. Your own family standing out against you. Somebody who's like a father figure to you, and you essentially, in every capacity, essentially speaking out against the Prophet ﷺ. People would try to listen to him, and imagine your uncle coming to somebody, he's crazy, don't listen to him. And that's why he's mentioned in the Quran by name as one of the dwellers of hell, because of how much influence he had on people to basically try to sway them from from accepting the truth. And then in Surah Al-Masad, the 111th surah of the Quran. Then we talked about Pharaoh himself, one of the greatest tyrants, and how we learn from the story of how this is repeated. And of course, now we're going to talk about the greatest antagonist, right? The greatest antagonist. And he's not great at all. He's the worst of the antagonists, right? Which is Satan himself, Iblis. And speaking about him is a very interesting concept. I wanted to recite some ayat which speak to how Satan essentially got his status. Basically ended up where he was. And that was, Satan himself, his name was not Iblis in its origin. He got this name after he received the status and title. We actually don't know his name. But Satan is, interestingly enough, he's known as the father of jinn, just like Adam is known as the father of mankind. What are jinn? We believe as Muslims that there are two types of creation in this world that have rationality, intellect. One of them is human beings, and the other one is something we call as jinn, right? Jinn can't really be translated very well in English. Some people say genie, right? And then you think of Aladdin, and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't work that way. Some people think of devils, and that's actually not true because not all jinn are bad. Jinn are just a creation, just like human beings are creation. So there's actually good and bad jinn, and good and bad human beings. So when you say devil, it always has a bad connotation. So devil actually should be the evil jinn, right? Some people can say demons, but in reality it's not. That's also not really, demons also has a negative connotation. So some people say demons and devils. In any case, we just say jinn, because we don't want to offend jinn that are sitting here right now. Anyway. So in any case, we believe that they also inhabit this world of ours in a different dimension. It's a dimension that you cannot see. And the craziest thing is quantum physics has actually shown that there's multiple dimensions within this world. It's called Z theory and string theory. So there's multiple dimensions in the same space that you're holding. Like for example, the dimensions of the unseen, the angels and the jinn, they can see each other. We cannot. We cannot. So it's interesting. So he is known as the father of all jinn, just like Adam is known as the father of all mankind. So who was the wife of Satan? I don't know. I wasn't at that wedding, right? So we don't know much about what happened prior to that, but we do know one interesting story. He was one of the greatest worshipers of God. He was actually a good guy, and he was elevated to the status of angels. In fact, I'm going to say something that might shock some of you. There is an opinion among the scholars of Islam that actually Shaytan, Iblis, was an angel who disobeyed God and he fell from grace. Do you understand? And this concept of what's referred to in Christianity as fallen angels, right? This is an opinion. It is a minority opinion. Because why? In the Quran it says, كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ. He was from the jinn, not from the angels. So this is a minority opinion, but it is an opinion. It exists in our tradition. So it's interesting, right? In any case, he was elevated to the level of angels, because angels, what is one characteristic that the angels have? Is that the angels cannot willingly disobey God. Willingly. You understand? So you might be like, well, what about the first group that says he was an angel? They say, well, no, this guy was raised at the level of an angel, and he could disobey God. He was given the rationality and the ability to do so. Anyway, that's why their opinion doesn't fully jive. So anyway, the vast majority of scholars say that angels don't disobey God. What they can do is to function within the parameters that God allows them to. They must fulfill the commands of God. They worship God without any free will. Angels do as they're told. They deliver, they give, they etc. within the parameters that God allows them to. So he was so pious that he was raised to that status. When he was in that status, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then speaks to a moment in history. And that is that while they were in heaven, God makes an announcement. And the announcement is that he's going to create a new creation. And that creation is Adam. Okay? And Adam, he said, will become my successor on earth. What does that mean? Khalifa. Right? This announcement that's made. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. And remember when your Lord, O Muhammad ﷺ, said to the angels, in the presence of also Shaytan, who was there, I will place on this earth a Khalifa. Okay? Khalifa means successor. It means deputy or representative of, hence representative. It will be leader, and it will be somebody that comes in successive generations. On earth. The angels responded, قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك. Are you going to place on earth someone that's going to do two things? First, spill blood, mean kill each other, and spread corruption. The question is then, how did the angels know this? How do the angels know that if human beings were to be placed on earth, they're going to spread corruption and spill blood? Who can tell me? How do they know this? Well, they knew this because the power of earth was given to jinn. They inhabited the earth and they ruled the earth. So they had free will. And what did they do? They did exactly what the angel said. That's how they knew. They knew that these beings which have free will are only going to spread corruption and spill blood. And this is also a being with free will that you're saying. He's also going to spread corruption and spill blood. And we're the ones who are already praising you. We praise you, we mention your name, we worship you. So what is the wisdom behind essentially creating another creation? Do you guys understand? Were the angels questioning God? No. They were simply stating and asking, what was the reason behind that? And God says, إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I know what you don't know. Meaning I know what they're going to fulfill, what their potential is. So essentially, in this moment, there's a sidebar. And that is that God knew our potential and believed in our potential more than we sometimes believe in ourselves. God knew that. And the angels, what? Questioned us. I'll talk more about this later. The angels questioned us. They said, oh, these guys are not going to make it. But God said, no, I know what you don't know, what they will fulfill. That's number one. Number two, before we go on to the story of what Satan then looks at, I have a question. And that is, if God planned to send Adam to earth, I have a question. Then did this command come before Adam committed sin or after he committed sin? This command that he's going to send him to earth, wasn't Adam not created yet? He wasn't created yet, right? So was this command that I'm going to make him a successor of earth, was it before he committed a sin or after he committed a sin? Before, 100%. So here's a question. How then can we say that God sending Adam to earth was a punishment for disobeying God? We believe Adam was given a command. Don't eat from the tree. You can spend your time in paradise. Just don't eat from this particular fruit or tree or etc. And what happened? Shaytan later enticed him to eat from the tree, right? And then he was punished by being sent to the earth. Right? But hold on a second. God says, no, I'm actually going to make him a leader and a representative of and a successor of me and send him to earth before he was even created. So how can we then say being on this earth is a punishment for humanity? How is that rational? How do we respond to this? Anybody want to take a shot or? Okay. Deeply philosophical question. The philosophical question is responded to in the following way. Number one, God already planned to send Adam to earth. So his sending him to earth was already in the decree of God. It was already there. Okay? Secondly, the fact that Adam disobeyed Allah, disobeyed God, and that was the cause for him to come to earth is a separate issue entirely. They're two separate things. They're related. One's a cause for the other, but Allah already planned for this to happen. And this is why in the concept of divine decree, It's like the following two examples I'm about to give you. How many of you are teachers? Raise your hand. Who's a teacher? Who's a teacher? No one of you become teachers, inshallah. Anyway, if you're a teacher, you know the following things. When you have students in your class, they come, and within the first week or two or month or whatever, there was a teacher that spoke to another teacher. And they say, how's your class? What do you think of your students? And that teacher says to the other one, oh, you know what? Ibrahim, he's, mashallah, like on point. He's going to be an engineer. And Sarah, she has really good disciplining skills. I think she's going to become like a CEO. And so on. So they're just bantering, right, with each other. But guess what? Decades go by, and some of them, exactly like she said, this became an engineer, that became a CEO. You're like, man, do you know the future? What's wrong? No, it's because of their experience with students and their behaviors and their personalities that teachers can have that level of intuition and foresight. Okay, this is with creation. What about God? Who knows what will happen and decrees it to happen and fulfills it by what? The free will of humanity to end up where it's been decreed for you anyway. Do you understand? And that's why the companions, when they heard this, they were kind of like confused. They said, well, O Prophet of God, if God already knows we're going to hell or heaven, why do we then act? So the Prophet responded, he said, اِعْمَلُوا لِأَنَّ كُلَّ مُيَسِّرٍ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. Act, because everyone will fulfill whatever they were destined for. So, this is what we believe in. That God already knows what's going to happen in the future, in the present, every moment. There's not a leaf that falls except He knows how and when it will fall. Right? But we essentially have the free will to act in order to find out that final destination. Okay? So, what did Satan do? Satan, he wanted to see this new creation. So he came up to him. He wasn't created yet. He was in a hollow shell. And as we know in the Quran, that the sources of these creations is as follows. That Adam was made out of sounding clay and molded from clay, right? And jinn were created, or Satan, Iblis was created from smokeless fire. Smokeless fire. And that the angels were created from light. These are the origin of their creation. Doesn't mean that this is how every one of them will be created. That's the origin of their creation. So he went and he saw the clay mold of Adam. So he decided to go through him and see what he's about. When he was being shaped and formed, he wanted to see what this creation is. That God raised him to such a level, he called him his Khalifa. He called him his representative, his successor. And this was a status that not even the angels received, neither did Iblis. This was a rank that was given to him. So he was kind of jealous and envious. What does he have that I don't? So this concept remained in him and started to build in him like a fire. Pun intended, right? He's made out of fire. But that envy poured into him, and he basically said he's made out of clay, sounding clay. If you tap on it, it rings. He's like, it's just a hollow being. What is he? What is he? Just a hollow being. I don't know what makes him so special that God chose him. So you looked at his what? Physical attributes and characteristics. Then God created him. And the example of him before God created Adam is the following. It's like the CEO of a company. This company's name is Jannah Incorporated. Okay? Jannah Inc. Paradise Inc. And the CEO of the company tells the entire employee force, we're going to have a meeting. So they come to the meeting. And he has one of the highest, you could say the highest positioned employees, known as Iblis. Okay? He was there as well. And then he says to the people of the company that I'm going to pick an employee, and he's going to become the head of the board. The board of the company. So the head employee becomes jealous. He's like, what's up with this guy? Oh, he's a new hire, and we're going to send him to Canada to get trained. Or the UK or whatever. We're going to send him to get trained there. And he's going to be the representative of the board. This is, in a very rudimentary example, exactly what happens. Number one, that position was given to him, but the training has to happen in Canada or UK for him to earn the stripes of being the head of the board. Right? So, essentially, Satan becomes overwhelmed with anger and jealousy. And that jealousy and that source of anger becomes the root of his disobedience of God's command and his revolt of his decree. He revolts against it. And he says, he doesn't deserve this. Why? I am better than him. Why? What makes him special that you chose him? And what is that? Questioning the wisdom of God. خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. That moment, these three components, which is anger and envy, forced at questioning the divine decree and the wisdom of God, is the source of all disbelief. Does Iblis or Satan disbelieve in God? No. He doesn't disbelieve in God. He's actually the greatest believer, if you want to talk about it that way. If it's just based on knowing God, he knows God. But he disbelieved because he questioned the decree of God. Believed it was not something that was wise. Believed that it was not something that was best suited because he deserved it more. It's very self-fulfilling. And again, all eight, we believe there's eight diseases of the heart that are the roots of all spiritual diseases. Anger, envy, right? Gluttony and jealousy. And greed, greed, and so on and so forth. So these are among the ways that he himself deluded himself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually describes Satan, what drew the source of his misguidance is his inability to come to terms with the decree of God and the fact that Allah favors some over the others. And that's why God says to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, وَرَبُّكَ يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَخْتَارُ مَا كَانَ لَهُمُ الْخِيرَةُ. And your Lord, O Muhammad, He creates whatever He wills, vast creation. And from this vast creation, He chooses who's going to be better in something, who's going to be blessed with something, and someone is not. Some people are blessed in ways that others aren't. And the example is that you'll start all in the same class, right? But by the end of the university, some person's going to get a degree and a person's not, for example. Or they're going to get three people get the same degrees. One person's going to become a better lawyer than another. Some person's going to become a better business person than another person. Just different ranges. Allah says He will bless others over others based on His choice. And that's why the Prophet had some of his companions come and they said, Ya Rasulullah, ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور. He says the people of wealth, they went with all reward that we can get. They give charity more than we do. So the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, you want the same reward that they have because they give charity and you can't? Because you're poor, you can't. So they said, yes. So he said, say this amount of dhikr. Say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, akbar. And the more you do that, the more rewards you get that makes up for the charity that you can't give. So guess what happened? The rich people heard about this too. So they started saying it as well. They started to say prayers and forms of remembrance just like people who are in poverty. So they came back to the Prophet and said, they're doing too, give us something else. The Prophet says, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. That is the blessing of God. He gives it to whoever He wills. Meaning what? Be content at your level. And the only way then you can outdo someone else, the Prophet said in another narration, is if you just do more. You have to do more. So if everybody's on the same level, how are you outdoing others? You have to do more. It's based on you. It's not based on God's limitations. It's based on your own. So, of course, this level of rage of him not deserving his status is what caused Satan to want to misguide Adam and his wife Hawa. And one of the ways that he did so is he went and he tried to entice him with the material. Do you see that tree that you've been forbidden from? Do you see that thing that you're forbidden from? That actually will give you the ability to live forever. So what? essentially wanting, you know those, what's the number one way that they sell like those aging creams? Live or drink from the fountain of youth, right? This fake fountain that doesn't exist, right? That basically will make you look younger, and that's what happens. When you get older, you start getting wrinkles and gray hair and all kinds of stuff. What is the one thing you want to do? You want to enliven yourself, to be younger, to live longer. You know, you're not going to live longer, but at least I'm looking younger. That's why Botox is like so famous, right? So in any case, that's the one thing that enticed Adam. And that's what made him seek to eat from the tree. We in the Islamic tradition don't believe he was enticed by his wife, as is in the Judeo-Christian tradition. His wife was like, why don't you eat from the tree? And it was happened to be an apple tree. I don't know why apples, right? But maybe that's why some people don't like apples. It was not. We don't believe it's an apple tree. It's a grape tree. We don't know what kind of tree it was. But in any case, that's not true. We believe that they were both equally enticed by Satan, Shaytan. So when he enticed them, he ate from the tree, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then basically calls out against Adam and takes them out of paradise, descends them upon the earth, and when they came to the earth, they did not have the clothes of paradise. Meaning they were naked essentially, and they had to cover themselves. So they covered themselves. And that's what essentially, there's a symbolic gesture in that. That when you disobey God, it leaves you naked from His blessings. There's a figurative sense in that. So in essence, God also expels Satan. And He says to him, well, I'm going to punish you the worst of punishments. So Satan says to God, hold on a second. I ask that you give me time. How much time? All of time. All of time. Until the day of judgment. And God accepts the prayer of Satan and says, fine. And He says to him, I will do as much as I possibly can to misguide all of Adam's children who you claim to be their successors. And God responds to him by saying, you have not been given an authority over them, meaning Satan does not have power over humanity. He cannot control people, like in that sense. Right? We'll talk about this a little more later. So He said, you have no command or authority over them. And then the number one thing that happens next is what differentiates the level of Satan from the level of Adam. What did Satan do? God said, I'm going to punish you. Satan said, bet. Like, all right. But just give me time. What could have Satan done? He would have just said, forgive me. But he was so arrogant, he didn't ask for the forgiveness of God. He insisted on his sin. He's like, no, I'm right. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And this is one of the satanic things to do. Essentially, when you're wrong and you say, I insist, no, I'm right. Or if somebody's coming to seek to rectify you, you're like, I'm good. This is satanic. And this is for those of you who are not in relationships yet, you'll find this when you get married. Right? Your wife or your husband comes to you and they're trying to correct you, and you're insisting, you're like, no, you're wrong. It wasn't me. This is a satanic feature. The highest level of human character was what Adam did and Eve. Instead of saying to God, no, it was actually, I'm right, and it was the decision you made that's caused me to do this, they said the following. It's one of the first du'as ever mentioned, right? Ever mentioned. Among the first prayers that Adam made was this following prayer. رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنُكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. O our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. And the beautiful thing here is that it was a communal thing. They made this prayer together. It wasn't blaming each other, hey, it was your fault. And she was saying, no, it was your fault. They took this on as a family. We wronged ourselves. And if you don't forgive us and have mercy on us, then we're going to be among the losers. Look at what they said. فَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا. What's the difference between maghfirah and rahmah? They asked for, oh Allah, forgive, have maghfirah for us, and rahmah. rahmah for us. So what's the difference here? The difference is maghfirah, or they're asking for forgiveness, is for how many times you've committed a sin. So no matter how many times you commit the sin, God will forgive you. You did it once, God will forgive you. You did it twice, God will forgive you. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever amount you did, God will forgive you. Can a human being do that? No. You wrong them once, they probably will never forget. You wrong them twice, they definitely will not forget. You wrong them 3 times, you probably get shot. I don't know. But no one will forgive you consistently over and over again for the same thing you do wrong. Isn't that right? Imagine someone comes up to you and they've wronged you and they ask for forgiveness. Some of you will forgive them. Say, okay, no problem. What if somebody comes to you and they ask for forgiveness, you know 100% that they're going to do that sin again, they're going to commit that wrong again? Would you forgive them? No. But God forgives you as long as you're sincere in the first time even. Knowing in His knowledge you're going to commit that sin again. He still forgives you the first time. That's mind-blowing. Only God can do that. So He says, فَإِلَّمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا. Oh Allah, no matter how many times we've even committed the sin, you're going to forgive us. وَتَرْحَمَنَا. And you envelop us with your mercy. Mercy here essentially talks about how big the sin is. No matter how big the sin is, God still forgives you. Because His mercy envelops you. Out of His mercy, you even prayed. Out of His mercy, He brought you near to Him to even ask. So what did they do? They said, if it wasn't for these 2 things, you forgive us no matter how many times we commit the sin, or how great the sin is, or the fact that because of your mercy we even ask, forgive us, otherwise we're going to be among the losers. What did they do? They just had ownership. They took ownership of their sin. They admitted it. And Satan couldn't do that. He didn't have agency or ownership. Psychologists actually talk about this. They say in counseling, when you go to counseling, they actually assess a person. When they're describing their problem to the counselor, one of the things that they recognize is where their locus of control is. They call it locus of control. So either you have internal locus of control or you have external locus of control. What does that mean? Where do you find that the agency is in your life? Is it within you, or is it within you blaming others? It's their fault, they did it, I don't get a right job because of X, Y, and Z and all this other stuff? No. The person who internally focuses on it, they say has a higher success rate. Because they're not blaming everything that they don't have an ability to change. And this is where my grandfather, he said something very powerful. He said, Hasib, don't be stupid like Satan. I was like, that's deep. I was like, what do you mean, Grandpa? He's like, Satan blamed everyone except himself. And he blamed his sin on the fact that he was better than Adam. He said what? I'm from smokeless fire, he's made from clay. I have a question to you all. Which one is better, smokeless fire or clay? Fire or clay? What's better? Fire. Why? It's powerful. What if I have a bunch of clay and throw it on your fire? What now? That's right. Right? So if you have a bunch of fire, what do they do? In fact, in brush fires or in America even, when there's fires, they throw sometimes what? Dirt on the fire. Right? So fire is powerful, but it can be extinguished with dirt even. Do you understand? And if somebody says, well, clay is better because it can do that. Well, no, if you have enough fire, just burn your clay. So the question actually is invalid. Neither are better than the other based on the physical properties. That's what my grandfather said. He's like, he was so stupid that he said, I'm better than you based on the physical properties that I was made from. He said neither was better than the other to begin with. In fact, that's why they say Satan was the first racist. Really. He said, I was made from this, you were made from that. And it's nonsensical. It doesn't matter what you're made from or what does that have to do with anything? How are you giving status based on where you're from? It's like me saying, let me give you a random example. It has nothing to do with anything that's happening in the world, for example, maybe. Right? Let me tell you that, hey, I came to East London and I deserve this entire road of properties because I happen to be American. You all messed with us already in the 1700s, now it's my turn. I'm coming back home, all right? And I claim this property now. Nobody says this right on the planet. Yeah, they do. So that level of insanity, the fact that you just came from something, or you believe you are entitled to deserve anything, land, properties, because intrinsically you were created in a certain way, this is nonsensical. God will never do this. And no, neither would He send a faith that tells anybody to do this. You understand? Simply just because you are how you were created. MashaAllah. Makes no sense. In fact, God says the opposite. God says, those who are righteous will inherit the earth. Based on the content of your character and your consciousness to God. So in any case, so this conversation is what essentially led Satan to the status that he reached. And God says, I will give you respite until the day of judgment, and you have no control over them. And I will read to you now the conversation that happened, or that happens with that moment between Satan and God, and Satan and Adam, and Satan and all of humanity on the day of judgment. What's the end result going to be? God says it in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ibrahim, this 14th surah of the Quran, starting ayah 19, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ إِن يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ وَيَأْتِ بِخَلْقٍ جَدِيدٍ. Prophet, do you not see that God created the heavens and the earth for a purpose? He could remove all of you and replace you with new creation if He wished. Meaning what? God, the Prophet Muhammad says, if that all of the children of Adam were created to commit mistakes. If you did not commit mistakes and ask God for forgiveness, then God will remove you from the earth and bring creation that commit mistakes and ask for forgiveness. You were created this way. That's what God wanted from you. So He said He could take you all away and replace all of you. You're replaceable. Don't think you're so special. Or I'm so amazing because I'm more righteous, etc. That's a satanic characteristic of pride. وَمَا ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. This is not difficult for God. وَبَرَزُوا لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا فَقَالَ الضُّعَفَاءُ لِلَّذِينَ اسْتَكْبَرُوا إِنَّا كُنَّا لَكُمْ تَبَعًا فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُغْنُونَ عَنَّا مِنْ عَذَابِ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ قَالُوا لَوْ هَدَانَا اللَّهُ لَهَدَيْنَاكُمْ سواء علينا أجزعنا أم صبرنا ما لنا من محيص. When they all appeared before God, those who were oppressed and they were weak, meaning they succumbed to the force of those who were overpowered over them, those who were influenced by them, those who followed oppressors or they didn't do anything. Weak, not those who were oppressed. These people were weak and they just followed those who said, essentially, they told them to do what they wanted to do. They said to those who were power seekers, we were your followers. Can you protect us from any of God's punishment? They will reply, if God had guided us, we would have also guided you. It makes no difference now whether we rage or endure with patience, there is no escape. And then when everything was decided, وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَعَدَكُمْ وَعَدَ الْحَقِّ وَوَعَدْتُكُمْ فَأَخْلَفْتُكُمْ وما كان لي عليكم من سلطان إلا أن دعوتكم فاستجبتم لي فلا تلوموني ولوموا أنفسكم ما أنا بمصرخكم وما أنتم بمصرخي إني كفرت بما أشركتموني من قبل إن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. When everything was decided, Satan will say, God gave you a promise, but I also made you promises. Hey, if you do this, you're going to find happiness. If you go out this way, you're going to make more money. If you try to go do this, all of those thoughts that come to you is Satan trying to tell you you're going to find something. If it goes against what Allah willed, that will give you happiness, that will give you a sense of comfort, that will give you that fountain of youth. All of these false promises. He says, I too made promises, but they were false ones. He will say this to all of mankind so that they realize everything that they followed in delusion was false. I had no power over you except to call you. And you responded to my call. So what's that call now? We call waswasatu shaytan. Right? The feeling internally that you hear or you have a sense to do something evil, even though that may not be good for you or sin or sinful. And you responded to my call. I just called you. So don't blame me, blame yourselves. I cannot help you, nor can you help me. I reject the way you associated me with God before. Meaning what? Everybody that came and associated partners with God, I'm free from you. I didn't tell you to do that. That was you. You claimed that such person was a son or daughter of God. You claimed that I have some kind of power, so you even worship me. Now they're Satanists, for the love of God, right? You remember that? Anyway, point being is there's a church of Satan even. So he's like, I'm free from all of that. And a bitter torment awaits such wrongdoers. But those who believed and did good deeds will be brought into gardens graced with flowing streams, there to remain with their Lord's permission. Their greeting there will be salam. Prophet, do you not see how God makes comparisons? A good word is like a good tree whose root is firm and whose branches are high in the sky, and yielding constant fruit by its Lord's permission. Allah makes such comparisons for people so that they may reflect. But an evil word is like a rotten tree, uprooted from the surface of the earth with no power to endure. The example here is what we'll kind of close off with, and that is that Satan ultimately has no power. That jinn don't have power over humanity to cause you to commit evil. Okay? So the one thing that we understand is that Satan has only the power to influence by suggestion. And that's what essentially marketing is. Right? All of what Satan can do is market to you evil. And it's whether you buy into that marketing or not. And the way to protect yourself from Satan is through, number one, knowledge. To know, as the Prophet ﷺ was commanded by God in the Quran, that essentially that Shaytan is a sworn enemy to you, so take him as an enemy. Inna Shaytana lakum aduwan fattakhidhu aduwa. So the problem is we don't take Shaytan as an enemy. You know why? You're like, well, I hate Satan. I don't want to, fall into his presence. But the way to protect yourself from Shaytan is actually to take physical means of protection. So we know that Shaytan has a means of affecting people. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, for example, if you have bad or evil thoughts, then do one of the following things. Number one, seek refuge from Satan. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Okay? Number two is to be in a state of wudu, or to make wudu, which is to purify yourself with water, known as the purification process called wudu. Number three is to recite certain adhkar that will protect you from the evil forces of Satan. Number four is to busy yourself in righteousness so that Shaitan cannot busy yourself in evil. And that's why they say, the famous statement in Texas, right? That idle hands are the devil's playground. When you become idle, what happens? All the thoughts come to you of committing evil. And that's why one of the ways that even psychologists, they tell you that you just busy yourself or stay away from areas where you know you'll be triggered to commit haram. You understand? So for example, one person, he tried to make the right steps towards his faith. So he has friends that were from his past. And what do they do on Fridays? Call him up, hey, you want to go out? He's like, bro, I'm good. But over time, they're like, just come. You don't have to drink. You can just sit in the lounge. Just chill. Okay, chilling is cool. Chilling is halal, right? I can chill anywhere. So he goes and chills in a club lounge. And that's what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. Don't follow in the footsteps of Satan. What are the footsteps? Sometimes Satan will not tell you, hey, do this, drink alcohol. It's a good idea. It's like, hey, why don't you just hang out at the lounge in the thing? And hey, why don't you just have a mocktail at the thing, for example? Then, hey, alcohol that doesn't intoxify you is still okay, isn't it? It's not. You're not getting drunk. You just, have. By the way, this is how people justified weed. I talked to a guy, and he literally was like, "You don't get intoxicated. There's a level." I'm like, "Bro, listen to me. Anything that leads to intoxication is not allowed unless it's a medical reason. Like people take it for medicinal purposes for their pain or acute pain that they follow, which is justified by a doctor, right?" And he's like, my friend's a doctor. No, not like that. It has to actually be for medicinal reasons. And then the scholars say it's allowed. You cannot justify taking any intoxicant. Whether you think it'll help you focus or does not, you're not allowed to do so. Go focus by drinking water, for example, right? Or whatever. So the point being is, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was told all of the ways to protect himself and the believers from Satan. And we also know, and final, that Satan has the ability to possibly take over the body of a person by possessing them. Now you might say, well, they don't have power over a person. This is not power of that person's complete self in every sense of the word. Sometimes it's moments. For example, they will not have sense of doing something, or possession taking place because they will lose a sense of doing something, for example. So this is possible, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that one can protect oneself by simply reciting the Quran over oneself if they feel like there's forces that are affecting them. And that's the greatest way of removal of these forms. There's also different types of devils that can affect or impact you. For example, the Prophet said that there is a particular devil that comes right when you pray and essentially reminds you of things of the day. So what do you do if you're losing focus in your prayer? You just say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim," and move your face slightly to the left and dry spit like this, like that, and then you go back and continue and try to refocus. You might be like, "Well, I'm thinking about it the entire time." Well, that's you. That's not necessarily Satan, probably, right? So that leads us to understand there's a balance here between two things. You have a desire within you, and you have Satan. Sometimes there's certain people that may have desires that even Satan was like, "Man, I didn't even think of that." So remember that you have both components. You as a human being also are inclined to wanting evil. And then Satan essentially could inspire you to want to act upon it, for example. And that's why in Ramadan, you might be like, well, if the Satans are chained, if the devils are chained, how then do we feel essentially all of the feelings that we do? Well, that's your own personal desire. The devils that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said are chained at the beginning of Ramadan are the major devils. So the minor ones, for example, still may be loose, for example. So those two components work together. It's also your personal desire that you must overcome, inclusive of Satan inspiring, etc. And that's how he earned his name. Shaytan, the word devil, means rebellious, the one who rebelled over God's command. And Iblis, that's his name, or Lucifer as it's translated. Iblis means the one that gave up hope from the mercy of God. So they say that misery likes company. Right? Misery likes company. Satan, because he misled himself, wants company in hell with all of the followers of Adam and the devils who followed him. So among the greatest forms of that is rifts that are caused by marital discord. All right? So among the people that report to Satan, they say that Satan has an abode on this planet. He sits on a throne over water somewhere on earth. Okay? And the devils come to him and report to him every evil that they've done. And he's like, "Oh, you did good. You need to work on it, right? Go away." Then the one that comes to him and says, "I went and caused discord between a husband and wife that caused their separation." He's like, "You're the one. You're the one who's the best." So what does this mean to us? Of course, compatibility and chemistry and the fact that are we fit for each other is something that is based on people's personalities, people's realities, right? Also, some people they may be the most righteous people, they don't end up together. Divorce is completely halal in Islam, there's nothing wrong with it, right? People might not just jive and they move on, but there's a problem here. When 60% of the cases of marriage are now in divorce, you're finding that there is taking responsibility for the one that you married problem. It's not necessarily that people aren't right for each other, they're not actually working on their marriage as they should be sometimes. So it really depends on the issue. But this is what Shaitan makes him happy, that he can put people into discord. I'll give you a simple example. This is a true story. All right? This is a true story. There's a husband and wife, they got married. They were part of an Islamic institution. Okay? So that's where they met. They're like, "Oh, whatever." They got married. And these people were supposedly learned, they're supposedly righteous, they're, whatever. So what happens is because they did not work on their personal development prior to marriage, they didn't have the level of emotional intelligence and maturity to deal with each other, differences of opinion, and how to handle, when you disagree with somebody you love, how do you deal with that? So what happens is I'm sure this is true, okay? They had a disagreement on an issue in Islamic law of whether eating camel meat breaks your wudu or not. Some of you are like, "What are you talking about?" Right? There's an issue in Islamic law. If you eat camel meat in particular, can you go then and pray, or do you have to wash up again? Right? So only one group of scholars, they said it actually breaks your purification. You must go and wash up, because the Prophet Muhammad said whoever eats camel meat, they should go wash before prayer again. And the majority said it doesn't. So anyways, they had a disagreement about this. So guess what? I forgot, the husband or wife took one view and the other one took another, because they had different teachers. You might think this is a normal issue, but what happens is that one of them says to the other, well, I think that's stupid. And the other says, stupid. And it becomes an escalated argument. It escalates and escalates. People's mothers is mentioned, people's fathers are mentioned, right? And it keeps going and going, and people don't know how to stop. They don't know how to, essentially like, okay, that's enough. It got so bad, it actually led to divorce. They divorced over camel meat. So this is what we're talking about, like people who are just not emotionally sanely mature, and they're creating problems within themselves because they did not develop themselves before marriage. That is who Satan is happy with. Not because they were not because domestic violence or incompatibility or a million other things that people get divorced for, which is valid and Islam completely allows, but genuinely because they don't work on it. All right? So that's what satisfies Satan the most. And what satisfies Satan the most, of course, is that one participates in what is considered, of course, clearly satanic. And we'll end there because that list is very long. Okay? There's a list of things that are satanic or things that are influenced by Satan, which I could talk to you about for another hour, but I'm not going to. And I hope that you can understand the perspective of Satan, what led him to become the greatest antagonist, or the weakest antagonist, we should say, and mislead himself and mislead humanity into this path of misguidance and ultimately the denizen of hell. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us and our families from Satan and from the footsteps of Satan, and allow us to essentially take protection from falling into it. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. Thank you for coming. Keep the faith.